Hi folks, HR Funk back with you with a question. What do you recommend to the garden variety gun owner when they are shopping for a defensive pistol? Now, what do I mean by the garden variety gun owner? Maybe it's easiest to explain what the garden variety gun owner is not to give you an idea of who they are. First of all, the garden variety gun owner is not a member of the Military Special Operations Command. They're not going to be dropped off in the ocean several miles offshore and have to swim in, cover a beach, and then go and take a military objective. They are not a police officer or a SWAT team operator. They are, in essence, the average person who has a need for a defensive firearm, but they are not the person who is going to spend hours and hours and hours on the range burning up truckloads of ammunition to try to improve their skills. They don't need some of the features of some of the more advanced firearms we have nowadays. For example, they don't need a finish on the firearm that's going to be able to withstand all sorts of weather, environmental conditions. We're not talking about a firearm that you can stuff full of mud and sand and what have you and have it still operate. What we're talking about is just a good, reliable firearm that these people are going to be able to use if they need to defend themselves. Now, a strong argument can be made for a double-action revolver, and in fact, I have made that recommendation to folks in the past. However, there are some people who prefer a semi-auto strictly because of the ammunition capacity that's offered by the high-capacity magazines. When it's someone who's looking for a firearm like that, the pistol that I've recommended most recently has been the subject of this review, the Smith&Wesson SD9 VE. The SD, you'll notice right off the bat, bears a strong resemblance to the earlier Smith&Wesson pistol known as the Sigma. It also, along with the Sigma, bears a strong resemblance to the Glock, which is what it was essentially designed to duplicate. Now, some of you may recall a video that I made some months ago where I was talking about the Sigma, and in that video I had discussed several of the problems that plagued the Sigma early on in its lifetime. Smith&Wesson improved that design over the years and largely did away with a lot of those problems. And the ultimate resolution to those problems is the SD. Although it somewhat resembles the Sigma, this is a very good firearm and it has eliminated those functioning problems that seem to plague the Sigma over its lifetime. The SD has a stainless steel slide. It does not have the melanite finish that you see on the M&Ps. So you don't have that extra corrosion resistance that comes from the finish. However, we do have a stainless steel slide and barrel for all the stainless steel and corrosion resistance that's offered by that particular material. The sights on the SD are the ubiquitous 3-dot system that we've come to know with many firearms these days. The sights are made of plastic, but they are perfectly functional, and we don't have to worry about them rusting or corroding when they're out in any kind of elements. The grip of the SD has checkering on the front and back strap and also a stippling on the side. The material is not quite the same as the M&P. It doesn't have quite the tactile feel that the M&P does, but it is also perfectly functional. You can get a hold of it easily, and it's got a small place here on the on the frame, to help you locate your thumb for a thumb's forward hold when you're shooting. That's one feature that the M&P does not have. By far the biggest complaint people had with the Sigma was the trigger pull, and this is one of the things that has really improved with the SD pistol. Although it's still relatively long, in fact it feels a lot like a double-action revolver trigger, it is much lighter and very smooth as compared to the Sigma. Now, keeping in mind this is a pistol intended for someone who's not going to spend hours and hours on the range and go through truckloads of ammunition improving their skills, that trigger makes a lot of sense. We do not want to take someone who doesn't have a high level of training, give them a firearm with a very light trigger, and then put them in a high-stress situation. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a recipe for disaster. And that is also why that trigger on this particular model makes a great deal of sense for those folks. Keep in mind, we're talking about our garden variety firearms owner. The SD has a 16 round magazine capacity, which brings it right in line with the other firearms of this same size. Very comparable to the Glocks, very comparable to the M&Ps. I realize there's a round or two one way or another, but still 16 rounds is a very good magazine capacity. And it is one of the reasons that I favor the 9mm in this particular pistol over the 40. Along with the fact that bullet technology has really brought the 9mm a long way in terms of effectiveness, and the fact that the ammunition is a lot less expensive, so when someone goes out to train, they can get more shooting in for the same amount of money. I think the 9mm these days makes a great deal of sense, and when you combine that with the fact that it generates less recoil for someone to be able to learn to master and learn to execute follow-up shots, there's just a lot going for the 9mm, and this is the direction that I recommend people go, again, when they're looking for a good, reliable firearm, but they're not a professional who's going to spend all that time training with their firearm. Interestingly, the SD does have an equipment rail, a Picatinny rail on the front, so we're able to incorporate lights and lasers if need be. With a firearm at this price point, I'm a little surprised it has that, but in fact it does. Disassembly for the SD is identical to the Glock and identical to the old Sigma. Obviously, first make sure you have an unloaded firearm, because you are going to have to squeeze the trigger. At this point, you can squeeze the trigger. Remember the hand positioning that I've talked about in previous videos for disassembling pistols. Retract the slide just enough to take tension off the recoil spring, and then we're going to pull down on the disassembly tabs on both sides. And apart it comes. We can remove the recoil spring assembly and the barrel just that easily, and it goes back together in reverse order. Make sure you locate the recoil spring in the proper place. Position the slide rails on the frame in the right place. Pull all the way to the rear, release, and your pistol is back together. The SD does come with 2 magazines and really represents a strong value in today's firearms market. One last point that I want to make. I have spent literally thousands of hours in firearms training. I've spent at least that much time on my own training and shooting, in addition to the formal training that I've undergone. If you got the idea by watching this video that I am somehow suggesting people shouldn't train with their firearms or that they can neglect their training, that's not the case. However, I do recognize that some folks are not going to make that commitment to go out and shoot and train as often, particularly as those of us who are professionals who carry firearms as part of our job. For those folks, the SD makes a lot of sense. It is a very reliable pistol. It has a lot of features going for it, and it's one that, as I said, I've recommended and will continue to recommend until I start to hear problems with it or something else better comes along. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, good shooting. Bye-bye.